Hi everybody, this is Judy at Judy in the Kitchen. Today I'm going to do an oil versus no oil experiment on rutabaga fries. Follow along with me. To prepare for this little experiment, I have taken a metal baking sheet here and I've got 3 pieces of parchment paper and I've labeled each one. This will be raw with oil, light coating of oil on it. This portion will have raw with no oil, and this portion will be boiled with no oil on it. So I've got my rutabaga cut up and peeled, and these portions are raw, and this one I've been allowing to cool just a little bit. It was boiled for right at 9 minutes until they were just barely fork tender. And the reason I'm doing that is rutabaga is so dense. I felt like giving them a boiling or even steaming them for a little bit will help to give them a head start. Okay, so for the raw with, let's start over here, raw with no oil. We've got raw with no oil. And I'm just gonna try to see if I can get these spaced on this parchment paper without crowding them too awful much, but I want to make sure that they are on this respective sheets there. Okay, and now I'm going to take the boiled rutabaga and put it on this sheet, and it's not going to have any oil on it. I am going to put a little bit of seasoning on here, but the test really is not for the seasoning as much as it is for the baking or roasting method. We want to test oil versus no oil. I know there's a lot of push out right now for no oil as much as possible. So that's why we're running this test, just to see what we can do here. Now, on the last portion here, see if I can do this where you can see. I do need to put a little oil on this. I'm going to try not to put a lot on there, and I think you'll be able to see what I'm doing. I'm not going to measure this out, but I'm not going to use a lot. That might be about a teaspoon's worth. I mean, you can use whatever amount of oil you really prefer. Now I'm going to just try to disperse this oil with my hands. All right, I think I've done about all I can do with that. Now we're going to go ahead and take my oily hand here and spread these out on the parchment paper on the baking sheet. And that's raw with oil. Make sure we have them all labeled appropriately here. They are a little more crowded than I like them to be, but this was the best I could do. I really wanted them to roast on the same sheet at the same time to give them a really fair test all the way around, okay? So that's why they're a little bit congested. Now I want to wash my hands off a little bit and then I'm going to season them. All right, so now what I'm going to do, try to spread this out so you can see it a little bit. I have just a little bit of paprika. I'm going to hopefully spread a little bit, not a whole lot on here. I don't want a whole lot on there, and really you can season these any way you want. I'm just giving this a test run, just really for the sake of the roasting method more than the flavoring, but I wanted something on there for my own benefit, so when I go to eat them I'll have a little bit of flavor here. And I have just a little bit of pink Himalayan sea salt. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit on them, a pinch on each section there, not a whole lot. The oven is preheated at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to roast these. I suspect that the raw with no oil is going to take a little bit longer to roast up than the others, so I may have to separate these out. but we'll see how it goes, and I'll let you know how long it takes when they are all roasted. I have some very interesting results here. All of these have been in the oven for quite some time. The raw with the oil and the boiled with no oil, both were done in about 50 to 60 minutes. Some of them were done at the 50-minute mark. It's impossible to cut the pieces exactly the same size, so the ones that were slightly larger I wanted to leave in there for just a little longer, so I allowed the whole thing to stay in there for 1 hour on those. Now on the ones that were raw with no oil, I allowed them to stay in there for an extra 5 minutes, so it was 65 minutes for this batch. And you can see that they kind of look like they were just drying up and not really doing a whole lot. But anyway, as far as time frame, I think right at an hour, 50 to 60 minutes or so, depending upon the size of the cut, works well for these two types. The raw with no oil may never actually come out totally done, although this piece is tender on the inside. Okay, so that's one factor. As far as appearance, most people are familiar with roasting vegetables with a coating of oil, and that's what we've got here, and you can see some of the brownness that was established on them. I did go in and turn them over about halfway through just to give them an opportunity to brown on both sides. These, the ones that were boiled first, did not brown like the ones that had the oil on them, but they actually look, to me, they look more appealing, like they are. Now that's personal subjective, you know, that's my personal opinion. It may not be yours, but that's really immaterial, but it's a matter of what you like more. I like the appearance of the ones that were boiled better. The ones that were raw with no oil don't look very appealing at all. We do eat with our eyes first, and these things look like just dried up whatever's, dried up pinkish, orangish French fries that didn't bake right. That's what they look like to me in appearance. So they don't look very appetizing. The other two do definitely look more appetizing than the ones that were raw with no oil. Now as far as texture goes, the ones that were steamed are nice and fork tender. They have a little bit of dryness or texture on the outer portion, but they're tender on the inside. And the ones that were roasted with some oil on them are definitely tender on the inside. They are more tender on the outside than those that were boiled and roasted with no oil. So these, I would say, are the most tender on the outside, but these two are pretty much equally tender on the inside, and I'll find out when I eat them for sure. Now this one, let's see, depends on which one I poke. This one seemed to be very nice and tender on the inside, but based on what I'm seeing, I think this one was resting against another slice, and that's why that area was tender, whereas the part that was exposed to the air is more dry on the outside. It's going to be a little more chewy. So, but they are roasted and they are tender on the very inside. So now what I'm going to do is taste them for not only texture but for flavor as well, and I will get back with you and tell you what I think on the flavor of them. Alright, now on the texture, I found those that were roasted raw with no oil were really on the rubbery side on the outside for sure. Some degree of tenderness on the inside, but they're very rubbery on the outside, so that to me was not appealing at all. I found that ones that were coated with oil and ones that were boiled first and roasted without oil had pretty much the same texture. They were tender on the inside with just a little bit of a bite on the outside, a little bit of chewiness on the outside. Okay, so they're really about the same. They're about tied on that one as far as I'm concerned. Regarding the flavor, I can say the same thing for the raw with oil versus the boiled with no oil. They taste about the same to me. Not a whole lot of flavor in the rutabaga itself. Now maybe it was my rutabaga, maybe they should have more flavor than that, or maybe it's my taste buds, but they didn't have a lot of taste, a lot of flavor to me, and I think all I really picked up was whatever flavoring that I added to them. So if you flavor them your way with a good bit of seasoning, they'll be just great, like a French fry. These that were roasted raw with no oil had almost a burnt flavor to me, where I picked up the areas that were browned really tasted more like a burnt flavor. I didn't really enjoy the flavor of these at all because I really personally don't like eating food that tastes burnt. So that's what I picked up on this. I really couldn't taste any of the paprika. I put very little salt on all of it, so none of it tasted salty in any way. So as far as ranking these 1, 2, and 3, I think the roasted raw with no oil comes out bottom of the list all the way around. And to me, it's pretty much a tie between these two, roasted with oil and boiled with no oil. Although I'm slightly inclined to go with the boiled with no oil as my top winner, simply because I think they look more appealing than the other ones. Now, if you want them to brown more, I guess you could turn on the broiler and let them broil for just a tad, or roast them longer, but you don't want them to roast too long or they're going to burn, because you can see how they started to brown on the edges. So I think we've got a pretty good conclusion here on these two. So a good option if you want to go with roasting with no oil in the way of rutabaga, if you boil them first, let them go for a good swim in some boiling water until they are almost fork tender, and mine took 9 minutes to get to that point. If you go that extra step, you can easily roast them successfully without oil. Well, the results were interesting to me. I will put them in the description box below to help you out. And I sure hope this does help. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. This is Judy at Judi in the Kitchen. Have a great day.